We are going to record this, so you'll get that notification. So stuck no more, what does that mean? For churches who feel like they're stuck with their stewardship practices or possibly not doing anything right now and just want to get some new ideas and have some new energy for stewardship, you are in the right spot. So let me show you our agenda for today. We'll do a brief introduction to what this is going to be about. We'll look at 4 different ways that ministries can become stuck with stewardship. These are the common things that MMFA has been seeing in the last year or so. We will look at some steps to take to get unstuck in these 4 different areas, some practical things that you can implement in your ministry. We will put it all together. I'll show you sort of a plan of attack, so to speak, if you want to get started looking at these different areas and becoming unstuck from them. I'm going to share some ways you know whether what you're doing is working or not. And then finally, we'll leave some time for questions. So as we're going through this morning's presentation, if you have any questions, just type them into chat. Hannah Jackson, our Director of Marketing and Communications, is on. She's going to pay attention to those, and we'll cover those when we get to the end. Invite you to make sure that you are muted here as we get ready to get started, and let's jump on in. Stewardship can be hard to talk about. It can be a topic that it's hard to find leaders who feel comfortable committing to the work, or who may say, I don't know anything about this, I don't want to commit to taking it on. Or you may be somewhere where you think stewardship is going fine here. We're able to pay our bills. We don't need to talk about stewardship. Or we even hear oftentimes our people don't like it when we talk about money. We don't want pastor to talk about money. So these are common. And if this is happening at your church, welcome, and you are in good company. It's a reason to be stuck with stewardship. And yet we know that God created us to be stewards, don't we? And we know that we love and we serve a generous God, and we are called to be generous and to share God's love with the world. So stewardship isn't something that we get to ignore or avoid. So this webinar's goals are pretty simple. We want you to see if any of these 4 ways that you can be stuck with stewardship are applicable for your ministry, and then for you to be able to determine, do any of the proposed solutions and steps make sense for you right now? There's no one-size-fits-all approach. MMFA does not have a magic formula that if we give it to you, it's going to work, and the formula is the same for everybody. Absolutely know that in your context, some of the things that we suggest may not make sense right now. So it's going to be important as you're listening and learning to be thinking about the church where you are, the ministry where you are, and what would make sense right now for your particular setting. So let's start and let's get unstuck. The first thing that I want us to consider that happens most often, I think, with stewardship when we get stuck is that we get misaligned with how we talk about it, and the focus becomes about finances. So a lot of churches will lead with, we need $50,000 to fix the roof, or we have this budget for 2026, and this is how much income that we need to be able to fund it. So that's a misstep, that's a misalignment, because it's not focusing on biblical stewardship, and it's not focused on any kind of spiritual vision. So when we start with those numbers, we don't sound like people of faith leaders, we sound like fundraisers. So you see here on this slide some of the direct impacts that can happen when you focus solely on the church's need for dollars. And oftentimes the outcome is that your growth gets hindered, your ministries might not be as effective, and sometimes you even can create unpredictable income streams. If people are asked to give when there's a crisis or episodically, they're not being formed as stewards, and so the gifts that they're making are not ones that are counted on with any kind of frequency. So you see here again, what can happen, misguided priorities. Our priorities should always be God and what Jesus did in his ministry, and what does stewardship look like as revealed to us through scripture as we learn about God and Jesus. So when we're focusing again on numbers, we got to pay the bills, which this is not to deny that you have to do that, of course, but if that's the lead, that's a misalignment and can lead to folks actually giving less. Because you see there in number 2, people start to feel like they're an ATM and they're not a valued part of the body of Christ. And then the other common impact of this misalignment is that you end up sort of stifling any kind of movement of the Spirit, any kind of how is God calling us? These are needs in our community. Can we meet them? Because it's so focused on the short-term thinking of trying to get more dollars in. And not focused on the biblical stewardship and the faith piece of it. So it's important to be thinking about that as you think about how you want to message stewardship. Let's say between now and the end of the year, if you're going to talk about it, how can you make sure that you're doing messaging and ministry that's based in what the Bible tells us about stewardship and how Jesus was an example for stewardship and not about the church's need for money. Let's look at how we're getting unstuck. 4 different examples. Again, preaching and teaching what the Bible says, connecting every dollar to mission. We always like to tell churches you should not be talking about your budget apart from your vision or your mission and what you're up to in the world. So every budget line should tie to ministry outcomes. Narrative budgeting, there's all kinds of tools that you can use, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But making sure you're not just talking about dollars, you're talking about the ministry that happens as a result of that money. Tell your ministry story first. What does that mean? Before you start talking about costs, making sure that you're talking about what God is doing through your church. That's the story that inspires people to want to support it. So again, making sure that you're spending time on sharing what God is up to through your church before you start talking about what it costs. And then finally, you treat stewardship as discipleship, not fundraising. So it's really important to remember that what we do with all that we have and who we are is part of our relationship with God. God doesn't want our money, right? God wants our hearts. So how are you helping people see that their choice of spending their time and their treasure and their talent is impacting their relationship with God, not the church's bottom line? So let's look at 4 specific ideas that you could implement in your church. The top quadrant you see there is a leadership retreat. We, MMFA, have really been hammering home in the last couple years that your leaders need to get together and have conversation and agreement and goal setting that includes stewardship. It can't just happen with one small group. It really needs to be pastor and board to come together and say, let's do some Bible study, let's set some definitions around this and make sure we're aligned in terms of our vision, our mission, and the goals that we're setting. This is worth the time. I know maybe some of you are already saying, gosh, Laura, we can't get people that would commit to doing this. They have to commit to doing this if they want the church to thrive and to be able to respond to God's call for your ministry. So MMFA, always happy to support you in this kind of retreat, to even lead a portion of it. So just know anything that we share today, I should have led with that, is something that we're happy to help with. So, but this retreat is really, really important. I know many of you have board retreats every year. There's probably a business agenda that stays the same in terms of how you conduct that retreat. I'm going to encourage you to stick stewardship in there in a really intentional way as you try to get unstuck if you feel stuck. Second quadrant you see there is an inventory on your ministry impact. That means looking at the different ways that your church is making a difference. So looking at all your different programs and activities and saying, hey, are these having the impact we want them to? I know we hear from a lot of churches that are looking specifically at Sunday school and Christian formation and how that's definitely changed in the last decade, if not more, and being willing to say, hey, do we need to change anything here? Do we need to pause anything, et cetera? So really taking some time to measure what the church is up to. Folks are given their time and their talent to enable the church to do these different ministries. Are they having the impact that you're hoping for and wanting? Third thing that we suggest is having a vision statement, having a clear and compelling reason that you're looking for, change you're looking for as a community. If I come to your church on a Sunday and say, hey, what are you all about? What are you up to? What are you trying to do together as a church? This is what you tell me to make me want to come back and get involved. So if you don't have an answer to that question, that'd be a great thing to get into at your leadership retreat. But what is our vision and our mission? What are we up to? This is tied to stewardship because, of course, your folks' gifts of time, talent, and treasure are helping you achieve this mission and vision. So it's really important to have this piece. And if you've been a part of any MMFA stuff in the last couple of years, you've heard us say this before. Worth reiterating. And then finally, the power of the story. I know that's been a thing that's been a part of all conversations in church for years now, is what stories are you telling? How do folks know what's going on and the impact and the lives that are being changed? So constantly having folks that are gathering those stories and communicating those stories is just as important now as it was 5 years ago when this kind of became the buzz of how to do church well, is to gather those testimonies and things. So what's our key takeaway from our stuck one around this financial misalignment and trying to shift? You see here, budget-focused asks prioritize financial contributions over faith formation. Your goal is to form stewards. And again, yes, I know you have to be able to pay the bills and you have to be able to pay your pastor. These things are very important for you to be able to have ministry. But if that is the focus, you're not going to get the results that you're looking for. The focus needs to be on biblical, mission, vision driven stewardship. What does that mean? You're centering everything on God, and you're connecting people's hearts to the church's ministries and their vision, the vision and the impact, and that helps folks want to be involved, be committed, and want to give their support. And you see here at the bottom of the slide an example of a statement that would be mission and biblically focused stewardship. Stewardship is not about the church's needs. It's about our need to participate in what God is up to in the world. When MMFA does our stewardship assessment, one of the areas that we invite you to look at is theology or biblical stewardship. What is the church saying about that? And I will tell you, as I looked at all the different churches that have taken that assessment since COVID, so in the last 3 years, let's say, that portion is the portion that consistently folks have a lot of room for improvement on. So do not assume that people know what the Bible says about this. Do not assume that that's what they're thinking about when you use the word stewardship. So it's really important to be paying attention to this area first and foremost as you consider how to get unstuck in the stewardship arena. So that's our stuck number one. Let's look at number two. And this is a really common one as well. I called it financial secrecy. So a lot of congregants don't know how the church is using money. There might be suspicion. There might be a reluctance to give. Folks have asked questions they didn't get answers to, et cetera, et cetera. So if you feel like there's any kind of distrust in your congregation, any kind of disengagement, it could be because folks feel like things are being done in secret. So you see here some examples of what this looks like. It means that all of your financial meetings, budget discussions are happening behind closed doors and not reported out in a way that the congregation knows what's going on. A lot of churches we work with have several different committees. Those committees do not ever come together and have conversation and talk about the financial aspect of what they're up to, that kind of thing. So if you feel like you've got a select few, an inner circle even, that everybody knows that's the people that have to do with the money, that's an important thing to start to try to change. Money mysteries. So how is the church using money? We hear all the time from people who say, we keep reporting it. We put in our bulletin every week how much the shortfall is. That is not a step that we advise, and we're going to look at that here in a minute. But still, the underlying current is this swirling of mystery around money. Specifically, too, it can happen with your provincial share, your district assessments if you're in the Eastern Canadian or Western District of the Moravian Church. People don't understand what that money goes to. That causes them to not want to give because they're unsure as to what's happening with the contributions they're making. And then finally, sometimes churches will ask folks for money and not give a good explanation about it, especially in a crisis situation. We've got a shortfall. It's November. We need you to give this much by the end of the year, without good reasoning for here's why we're where we are, et cetera. So again, these are just some examples of what we see when we work with churches in this area that we call sort of secrecy or lack of information.
Hi.
So what do we do to get unstuck here? You see 4 different suggestions on this screen. The first one is sort of the open book, open door approach. No, that doesn't mean the congregation is invited to every budgetary meeting or every trustee meeting. There's a reason you elect those folks and entrust them to do the good work of the church. But how accessible is your financial information for people? Do they know who to ask? If they ask that person, does that person respond to them? I am discouraged by how many people say to us, we reach out and we don't get answers to our questions. That is not helping people want to contribute more to the church. So again, open book, open door, just making sure that you're communicating about information and decisions that are being made, why they were made, and folks know who to ask when they've got questions. Regular communication, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Again, that doesn't mean putting in your bulletin every week if there's a shortfall that does not inspire people to want to give, that makes them anxious. But having some kinds of regular, healthy communication around finances is really important, not just an annual meeting or an annual report. Plain language reporting. I had somebody say to me once, I don't speak finance. What do these words mean? So just making sure that you're avoiding any kind of accounting jargon or anything that might not be clear to your folks. I would encourage you, if you've got somebody who's not on the trustees or not part of the financial leadership team, have them review what you're putting out. Make sure they understand what it says before you put it in the congregation. And then finally, and that doesn't mean that this is the least important one, but making sure that you're addressing any kind of issues honestly. Don't hide financial challenges that you have. Make sure that you're addressing them clearly and being upfront about them, and try to frame them as an opportunity for people to be involved in changing course and in partnership with you as you seek to correct any kind of or overcome any kind of issue that you've got. So here's 4 really practical implementation steps if you're seeking to make sure you're not being too secretive around money at your church. One is just to have a monthly dashboard. Dashboard could be a print piece, it could be something online. Don't get hung up on that part, but just sort of a one-page summary of what's going on in terms of your income, expenses, etc. If you have endowments and you're taking monies out of those, make sure people know what they are and what they're for. And then sharing the impact of what these monies are being used for. So communicating that with folks. Quarterly updates, just being able to tell people, hey, this is how the financial health is connected to different ministry outcomes. So this quarter, we got this much in the offering and this much went out to support a particular ministry or to provide a particular program. So again, it's not about the money, it's about the ministry, but you're communicating both on a quarterly basis. Most churches have an annual church meeting, and so we encourage you, maybe not at that meeting, maybe it should be a separate one prior to that, to have an opportunity where folks can ask questions. Maybe they submit those questions in advance of the meeting so they know they're going to come to the meeting and that question is going to be answered for them. Again, you may say, oh, nobody shows up for those, or we don't know that people want this, but try it and put it out there for people just to see. Because even if no one comes, you made the effort and you showed, hey, we're trying to be really transparent and involve folks. There's nothing that we're trying to hide here or that only a select few get access to. And then finally, you see budget 2 ways. That's line item and narrative. Again, not everybody speaks line item. They want to hear a story. Our brains are geared to listen to stories. Jesus told stories, ergo, this is the story of your budget and how important that is. MMFA can connect you with a really great resource. I know one of our participants on today has utilized it. We've had some other folks use it too to help your church create a narrative budget. So if you're interested in learning more about that, this is always one of the steps that we recommend that you take. It's simply put, just telling those line items again as ministry. So electric bill costs this much, but look at all the things that happened when the lights were on here. So it's a way to help people make that jump from their gift of money to the ministry that's happening in a way that's beyond your line item. So what's the key takeaway from all of this around financial secrecy? You're wanting to build trust, and that takes intentionality and it takes time. So again, you see, showing folks where the money goes, being transparent around, here's how we're spending. You can even, again, with your narrative budget, you would percentage out and folks would see the portions related to facilities maintenance, staffing costs, etc. But it helps them know my gift of this much money to this church, here's how it was utilized for ministry. Ministry return on investment. How are you helping people see the impact that their dollars create? So let's say your line item is $500 was spent in August for Christian education. Being able to speak to that and say, hey, it costs us $2 per kid to do this, or it costs us this much money a month to do this. So the more you know about numbers and can share that with folks, There are people that really respond to that. They trust you when they know you're paying attention to how much that investment is having in terms of return for your ministry. Spoke to this a little bit already, but challenge acknowledgement. Hey, here's what we're facing, and here's how we're addressing it. Here's how we got here. We have a shortfall, and we've looked carefully at how money has been spent, and we know the cause of it. We're telling you the cause of it, and we're inviting you to help us correct it together as a church. So I think it's really important, and as I say, it's helped a lot of churches craft letters and language when they're in this situation. So we're happy to be a guide or a coach on that if you need help with it. Again, it's not to put people into crisis anxiety mode, which is oftentimes what happens if you're not careful. It's to show that they can trust you, that you are on it, so to speak, and you are inviting them to be part of it as you try to overcome whatever the challenge is. And then again, leadership accessibility. This is regular opportunities for conversations, asking questions. There's several churches this summer and even this fall that are doing a weeknight session around the church's finances, kind of a come with your questions. Did you know? We're going to present everything you could ever possibly want to know about the budget so that when they arrive at church council in the fall, they're better educated. So again, an investment of your time as leaders to be transparent and to say, hey, come, we're going to do a workshop. Treasurer is going to be involved. Ask your questions. You're going to learn everything about every designated fund we have, however you want to shape it. Just making sure the congregation has that information and and that you as leaders are accessible here. Stock number 3, we like to call this one scarcity mode. You see here that this church doesn't have anybody in it. So churches oftentimes, as dollars become tight, anxiety starts to form around, are we going to be able to pay bills? Offering was short this week. What do we do? We quickly can become locked into this mentality of scarcity. So focusing on what we're lacking rather than what is there. Celebrating what's in front of us or only saying this is what we don't have or what we need. So this negative cycle starts that discourages generosity. You see here on the slide some different impacts of scarcity mode. And we see this oftentimes with churches, understandably, that are really struggling to pay bills. We can't possibly do any new ministry or look at the needs of our neighbors because we're just hyper-focused on being able to get more dollars in the door. And this is where this sort of funnel, negative downward spiral can begin. People start to give less. Unfortunately, oftentimes they're not motivated to suddenly give more. They start to say, oh, my church is going down the tubes, I'm worried, and they pull back a little bit. And I think finally, and this is also what happens a lot of time as leaders get more and more nervous around money coming in or not coming in, start making decisions that are based out of that scarcity or that fear. And as we hoard our resources that we have as a church, we are inadvertently telling our people that maybe they should do the same. We do still have a generation of Moravians that are part of our ministries that are giving because the church is central to their lives, beloved, and they feel that sense of duty and that have that innate trust, and they're going to give. They also, chances are, were formed biblically as stewards at some point in their lives. So that's in them too. What we're seeing, not just in the Moravian denomination, but more broadly, is that's different for people who are not in that oldest generation. So we've got to do more work to help these folks be engaged and formed as stewards. And if we're really stuck in that scarcity mode, again, understandably, it's scary when you see fewer dollars coming in and you're not sure what that's going to mean for the church. But how do you as leaders avoid these different impacts and avoid getting into scarcity mode is really important to be thinking about. So getting unstuck. Now we see a church that's full of people. Great. So how do we focus on not what's lacking, but what's there? One way to do this is to simply work to create a culture of gratitude. For a lot of churches, this is the low-hanging fruit. This is the fun stuff, and it's exciting, and people are willing to step in and do this kind of thing. And when I talk about a culture of gratitude, I know if you're sitting there thinking, gosh, are we just ignoring reality? And no, that's not what we're trying to do as we celebrate gifts and tell stories of God's provision and faithfulness. We are not pretending like there aren't some challenges in front of us financially, but it's also placing that reality in the context of God's provision and faithfulness, trying to inspire generosity rather than scare people into giving and even cause them to start hoarding things. So you see here some different examples, recognizing time, talent, and treasure equally, celebrating those, telling stories about God's provision and faithfulness, regular testimony and scripture studies around this, making sure that there's Thanksgiving as part of what you're up to. How do you give thanks on a regular basis? And we'll talk about that more in the implementation slide here in a second. And then really being able to celebrate the impact that we have. Moravians are very humble. When we give, it's not to see our name on a billboard or on the side of a building even, but it is important for our communities of faith to be saying, hey, how do we celebrate the gifts that are at work for God's work through our church, and regularly highlighting those and making sure folks know about them. So here you see 4 different ways you could possibly work to get unstuck and create that culture of gratitude. Top left, you see some weekly suggestions. Chances are you're already doing some of these things. If you're a stewardship committee or you've got leaders that are involved in stewardship, put this in front of them and invite their thoughts on how they can be a part of some of these practices if it's landing all on the shoulders of the pastor or of the staff. Monthly celebrations, it's great to show appreciation for your different volunteers. Had the pleasure to be in a church not long ago that was doing a prayer breakfast to commission their Sunday school leaders for the school year, showing appreciation to them on the front end rather than waiting until the year was over. There's all kinds of ways that you can show appreciation for the different people who are making gifts, mainly oftentimes of time and talent. Ministry milestones. Maybe you've had a community feeding program and you just fed your 500th person, or you had your 50th meal. So having folks that are in leadership roles that are paying attention to milestones that are happening in different spaces for the church and being able to put those in front of the congregation. And then finally, spotlight on stewards. You know those folks that are always at work in the background that you can count on to get the work done and to be present to help. How do you put a spotlight on the things that they're doing? And I don't mean necessarily publicly. Maybe it's a monthly celebration where somebody says, I want to take you to lunch, and I am so grateful for all you do for our ministry, and I want to celebrate that with you. So when you put these in front of you, it doesn't mean necessarily a large public thing, although it could, but I think there's different ways that you can spotlight your stewards who are at work that can help the congregation also share their gratitude for that kind of stuff. You see some seasonal gratitude events. Again, I think it's great to have a celebration every year. Maybe that comes early in the year. We celebrate all these things that happened last year. Did you know that we had this many baptisms and we had this many whatever drives to raise canned goods, whatever it looks like. But celebrating that, being able to say, hey, we're going to rejoice and give thanks to God for this and what took place. A thankathon, having folks that are willing to reach out to people and thank them. Maybe that's making some phone calls during the month of November, whatever it looks like. Again, we've worked with a lot of trustees and elders that this is stuff that they want to do and that they're excited to be a part of. And a ministry fair, of course, giving thanks for all the different ways people can be involved, and inviting folks if they want to learn more to join those different ministries. Finally, here you see some language shifts. Problem first to blessing first. So the problem is we're going to have an event and no one has signed up to help. But how do you shift and put the blessing first? We are blessed to be able to offer this particular ministry and excited to invite you to join it. So it's just a simple shift in how you invite people to give of their time or their talent for a specific ministry. What's missing to what's present, again, focusing on what we've got and the gifts that God has put in our communities and making sure that we're leading with that and not solely focused on what's missing. Are we complaining or are we celebrating? And are we critical or are we appreciating? Again, these are just tones, and as leaders, you all are setting the tone. So if some of those shifts need to happen, it's important for the leadership to be the ones to lead there. So what's our key takeaway for this culture of gratitude? You see everything that I've already suggested. The goal there is for it to become systemic, consistent, intentional, and not just something that you do every once in a while. that you're celebrating and not just informing. So does the bulletin say we had 20 people for event X, or does it say we are so excited, we give thanks for, we lift up, etc.? Language around celebration. Are we centered on God? Again, this ties back into how we lead any of these stewardship conversations, centered on God, how God provides, faith that God will provide even in these times that we're really anxious about it, making sure all the messaging is centered on God. And then finally, you see a little formula there. Gratitude first, a specific blessing, God's faithfulness, and forward-looking trust. So an example, you need more people to join the choir, let's say. So we are grateful for the dedicated choir members who blessed us with beautiful worship. We're excited to see who God will call to join this joyful ministry next. So that kind of invitation versus we need people to join the choir, it could make a difference as you try to shift your culture a little into a space of gratitude, being thankful for what's there and not only trying to address what's missing. And finally, stuck number 4, this is what we call generic stewardship. And you see here on the screen some different examples of that. Typically, most Moravian churches have a one-size-fits-all approach. Everybody getting the same message, mainly because we don't have time and we don't have folks that want to take the time to potentially explore how these messages should be different and what that could mean. So that's a common way that we get stuck. Another one is not having the data that we need to be able to do anything different and targeted. So if we don't know information about giving, or numbers from past years and what the numbers are this year, et cetera, then we're going to keep doing the same thing for everybody and hoping that it changes. And then finally, we make a lot of assumptions, don't we? So sometimes we've worked with leaders before who are making assumptions that everybody knows certain things about the church finances. I'll give you a specific example here. Church that assumed everybody knew that if somebody made a pledge to the church, this was the person who knew what that pledge was. I did small group conversations with the members of the church. They all thought other people knew what their pledge was. There was a lack of trust, a lack of knowledge around who knew what when people were making commitments. So this kind of thing. Don't assume that everybody knows. And also don't assume that everybody's comfortable with the same approach. We'll talk a little bit more about that on our next slide as we look at ways to get unstuck when we're doing generic stewardship. You see on here multiple entry points. That means giving people a way to get involved that meets them where they are. You've got people in your pews that have been loyal and dedicated stewards for years, and maybe they're less likely to give time and talent now. They're not as physically active, but they're able to give treasure, or the reverse is true, and they're on a fixed income. They've lost a loved one and financial circumstances have changed. Not everybody is in the same place here, so providing multiple entry points to meet people where they are is really important. If you've got brand new members and Commitment Sunday's coming up, like, they may know nothing of what that means. So it's giving them a different entry point than you're giving your folks that have been pledging or making financial contributions for years and years. Having an educational approach, again, this kind of builds on what I just said, making sure people know more about what stewardship means biblically, what it means as it's lived out through the life of the church, etc. Flexible options. I think a lot of our churches are way better on this now. Different ways that people can give. If you do invite people to make commitments, is it important that commitment's for an entire year? Do you let them say, hey, I'm going to try to make this commitment for 6 months and then I'll revisit it? That kind of thing. So how flexible are you as you invite people to make gifts of time, talent, or treasure? And then finally, I think the spiritual formation piece is, again, really important. We presume people know things, we presume they've been formed, but we're not doing the formation, then that's not true. And people in different age cohorts, different life circumstances have different needs. Think about yourself as a disciple, where you are on your journey with God, where you are with your own stewardship. It probably is different than the person that you might sit on a pew with on Sunday morning. So are we giving folks different options for their formation as stewards, or is it a one-size-fits-all approach? To be unstuck, it needs to be different options. So let's look at 4 different ways that you could implement changing from generic to more personal and accessible stewardship. The educational piece, there's some different ideas here. Again, this is a sample, just sort of a basic stewardship 101. You may find you've got folks that have been members forever that come for that. They're curious to learn what the new message might be. I feel like some of you are probably sitting there saying, if we were to use that word, nobody would want to come. So you've got some work to do. Happy to help with it. But again, Bible-based, vision, mission-based stewardship should be something that people get excited about with the right intentionality, and it takes time and commitment there. Financial health workshops. This could be something that's geared towards people of all ages, or you may say, hey, we're going to offer something specifically for our folks who are young adults, or our folks who are approaching retirement, people who are looking at gift planning, that kind of thing. So different workshops that meet people where they are. Again, gift planning seminars, and then a family curriculum is really important. We work with a lot of churches that, thanks be to God, they talk about stewardship every year, but it's an adult only kind of thing, and they've got kids sitting over here that are hearing nothing about it. So how can you offer some kind of curriculum where your kids are learning alongside parents or even the whole church, so that everybody is learning about it together? I think this is really important. You see some different examples of this flexible giving options there. I'm not going to go through each of those. I think they're pretty obvious in terms of what they mean. Personal connections, I think, are key. You know this, small group conversations. Recent data has shown that the people who are more likely to give money to your church aren't necessarily the ones present physically for worship. It's those that are deeply connected with a small group of some kind, whether that's choir, Sunday school, whatever that looks like. So making sure you're giving folks opportunities in small groups to be together for ministry, and then that you're weaving stewardship into those conversations and studies. Mentorship program, this is not necessarily a direct, I want a stewardship mentor. This is what we see in some churches that do have folks that are paired up as prayer partners, spiritual journey partners, that kind of thing. Multi-generational type partnership is that stewardship can be a piece of that. And it can give somebody a really safe place to have conversations about it if they need to. So that's something to think about in that particular area. And then finally, accessibility considerations. I touched on these a little bit. Being aware of people's different life stages. They change, economic changes. Does pastor know if somebody who was a regular giver suddenly has stopped giving? That might mean they lost a job or something major has changed. Maybe they're really unhappy with the church, but how do leaders, how do you address that if you see different changes in giving patterns, or do you just let it go and hope for the best? It can be an opportunity for some pastoral care, or some relationship building if you're sensitive to it. Cultural sensitivity, we've got folks in our churches who are from other countries and may have different backgrounds related to what stewardship looks like, what talking about money means. So just being aware of that if your church has people that are from all different kinds of cultures and places. And then online versus print accessibility. Do you have people who are not online? And if so, how are they still receiving messaging in print, and vice versa? Is everything that's going out in print also available online? So just paying attention to making sure that all of your communications are accessible in both ways. So our key takeaway for generic stewardship is to make it personal, of course. So that's, again, meeting people where they are, making sure that your primary goal is forming stewards, not trying to get more funds from people. How are we prioritizing the relationships over the transactions? And how are we treating people as ministry partners and not just as donors? You all know, this when you've had somebody approach you as a fundraiser, maybe for a nonprofit or your college. You know how it feels when you think that in that person's eyes, you're just a check that they're hoping that you'll write. So the church is the place where we cannot do this, right? We are close to the folks that are part of our community. We are united around the most important mission and vision there can be. So that's a great opportunity to really make sure that you're treating people in partnership and valuing that relationship, and that they don't just feel like they're being seen as a wallet that needs to be opened up. So here's an example you see at the bottom, just some language you could use if you decide to do some different financial workshops. And they'll say happy to help you lead those or lead those for you, just to let people know, hey, we understand faithful financial stewardship looks different in every season. The person who just started out in their job cannot be expected necessarily to give as much as somebody who's been working for years and has moved up the so-called ladder. So how do you make space and communicate and use language so that folks know you don't have the same expectations from everybody and you want to meet people where they are? So let's take a minute to put it all together. This is just an idea of how you could start. If you say tomorrow we want to start getting unstuck, what do we do? I think first and foremost, and this is probably where you're going to spend the most amount of your time, is to get your foundation in place. Do not just suddenly start talking about stewardship on Sunday. You need to make sure that you've got your leaders on board. Again, this is around biblical, vision, mission-based stewardship, that kind of approach, and having a plan for each area. All the time we're telling people, do the folks around your board table all agree what it means when you say the word stewardship? I've yet to be in a space where that is the case, right? So it takes work and conversation and intentionality to get that started. So that's really, really critical. And then start doing an assessment of how your finances look, how you communicate about them, who's involved with them, et cetera, different systems, and identify how can we improve transparency about this. And then go ahead and start having some folks you've got writers, I bet, people that enjoy writing, people that enjoy interviewing and talking to one another, start collecting some stories. Look at your calendar and say, are there certain months where it would make sense to highlight and celebrate a certain ministry, and start looking at 2026 and saying every month, is there a certain thing, a story that we want to tell that would make sense? We've got a template we can share with you to help you if you start wanting to plan in that way. So foundation is critical. We know that, right? So spending a lot of time there is really key. Again, MMFA happy to help and be a voice in that conversation for you. Second thing you want to do is to start your communication. So again, you as leaders have come together, you've agreed upon what it means as you start talking about stewardship, what it means for your community of faith, what it means for us individually, et cetera. And now you've got this message that you're putting in front of the congregation. You're going to start some ways that you're going to report on finances, whether that's monthly, quarterly, whatever that looks like that you decide is right for your church. Again, you may say we're already doing X, Y, Z. I would encourage you to say, if you are sharing your finances quarterly in this way, how do you know that that's working? Do you ever invite people to give feedback? Or is anybody asking questions? Or are you one of those churches, like a lot of them, that say, well, we told people 8 times and they still didn't know? Okay, is there a nice way you should tell them that might be the one that breaks through? So this is ongoing work. And I think sometimes we set it and we forget it, and we don't review what we've been up to and determine, is it working? How do we know? Do we need to change anything? So that's important if you're saying, hey, we've already got some regular transparency and reporting happening about our church's money. Make sure you look at it and determine whether for sure what you're doing is the right stuff for 2025 and 2026. And then get started on some weekly gratitude practices. Again, I would be willing to bet if you leave this webinar and go to your next meeting, whether you're an elder or trustee, unified board, whatever that looks like, say, hey, we're going to start doing some stuff in gratitude. You can get people on board with that pretty quickly that want to help you with that. So go ahead and determine, hey, what are we going to do to say thank you to people? What could that look like? And start that second. Third, you see engage personally. These are the different educational opportunities, small group conversations, things like that. If you're sitting there again saying, gosh, if we were to offer that, nobody would come. Okay, how can you offer it in a way where you meet people where they are and you do get to engage them? And this could turn into some personal visits around conversation for the church, not necessarily specifically about stewardship, although that's underneath it all, but just sort of the life of the church, where we are, where we're headed. This time of year into early next year is perfect for that. It's a new year. We've got new vision. God is calling us to meet needs in new ways. Where do you see yourself in all of it, right? So it's that personal invitation. And of course, that we know that's how Jesus recruited the disciples one-on-one. So get personal with people in these different ways. And again, making sure you've got some flexible giving options that are available. A lot of churches offer them all: text to give, automatic draft, all that kind of thing. If you're only offering a couple, not necessarily saying you need to do more, but just making sure you've got some different channels for people to take advantage of. Reminder, if your church uses the giving portal, MMFA absorbs the fees. So we would love for folks to be able to get on the portal, give to your church through that, because you'll get 100% of their gift. So that's a great giving option if you're not taking advantage of it. And then finally, you want to sustain the momentum. The first bullet point that you see there is evaluate and adjust. Again, we said it and we forget it. We did this in 2024. We're going to do it in 2025. We're going to do it again in 2026. Or your plans may go even further back. We've been doing this for 20 years. So just taking a minute to say, hey, these new things that we tried to get unstuck, did they work? What do we want to do? What do we want to adjust? Did something blow up? Do we need to address anything? What went really well that we should celebrate? That kind of thing. So having that evaluative lens with you at all times is going to be really important, but especially as you come to the end of a cycle and you've tried some different things and you're taking some time to review. I think an annual plan built on this foundation is really important. Again, we've got templates. We can help you do that. You're not on your own there. A lot of people, and if you've been part of a webinar before, you've heard me say COVID shifted things. Folks have a harder time planning for a year. We've told churches shorten it, only look at 6 months or look at a quarter. But I think it's worth, if you've got some people that are willing to do this, to say, hey, 2026, just around the corner. What are we hoping to do each season? Maybe it's quarterly, et cetera. And no, that may change, right? But you've got some goals in mind and some ideas in mind and some ways to get people excited and on board with it, rather than kind of living moment to moment here. So I want to make sure before we wrap up that you see some different ways that you'll know whether any of this stuff is working. I think the church consistently falls short. We try these really great things, it's creative, we got excited about it in a webinar, we went out and did it, and we have no idea whether it had the impact that we had hoped it would have. So I wanted to offer you some different ways that you could potentially measure in some of these different unstuck stewardship spaces. So what would it look like in terms of engagement? It's working, we know it's working. I will be blunt, more people are giving money. Something worked because suddenly we've got more money coming in. So that's one way that you could measure. Certainly more people who are volunteering, folks who are willing to come to any kind of financial transparency meeting or anything that you offer in the financial space. You've got more people that are engaged and coming there. And you've got people that want to come to the conversations and opportunities around stewardship, whether that's a Sunday school class or a workshop, or even a Sunday that you may call Stewardship Sunday, as a lot of our churches do. Having people that want to be there and not making other plans that weekend would be one way you would know. Culture shift indicators you see there in that second quadrant. This is a little harder to measure, but you see more expressions of gratitude, increased ministry impact stories being shared, less anxiety in your leadership discussions. And this is one would be my hope for all of you, is more people coming forward saying, hey, how can I help with this, rather than having to wait to be asked to help. So I think, again, as you start to implement some of those gratitude steps that we covered on that slide, the hope would be that the culture would start to shift and folks would be able to, or doing these things that you see here. Again, this is a harder one to measure. Finally, your financial health measures. Folks who are consistently giving, that number increases. I know some of you may be at churches where you do have an annual pledge cycle. That means something different than for those of you that just folks give on the offering and you receive that and report on it. But knowing, I would encourage you to have some data around your giving and be able to track, are we seeing any increases in folks who were giving infrequently, now they're giving more consistently. A little bit of a reduction in your month-to-month giving volatility. You know something's working if typically in the summer giving flex off, but this summer it didn't. So maybe you focus on encouraging folks to set up recurring gifts, whatever that could mean, so that you can count on that financial stewardship still happening even at a time when people are less present. That's the most common time of year that we hear about. Higher percentage of committed giving, and then finally you see emergency fund establishment and growth. I put that one in because I know some of you are at churches where you're not going to suddenly start asking people to make a pledge. Pledging is a bad thing, and while I would love to change that, that's going to take work. Let's do it together. But if you think there's no way that would happen, could you establish an emergency fund and invite people to give to it? So there's specific ways to do that that can be successful, but I offer that because if you are in a space where you say, no way, we don't need to ask people to make commitments or pledges, we're never going to do that, could you create some kind of fund, invite people to give to that would help cover you and give you some money in a time when you might need it versus that crisis giving invitation. Finally, here you see, just a reminder, healthy financial stewardship is a marathon, not a sprint. It is not a magic ATM where you start doing all these things and cash is going to pour out. It's formation, first and foremost. It's part of our discipleship, part of our walk of faith with God, and we are on that journey our entire lifetime. So nothing's going to change overnight. Again, I am aware we exist in a world right now more than ever where it seems that people have a hard time making commitments, especially to church. They're tired. They don't want to do the work. And that's a tough conversation to have with people. But encouraging folks to want to do this work is going to be really important for the health and future of God's work through your particular ministry. And as I've said over and over, MFA is happy to help with that. I should add, as we move into a time of questions, MFA stewardship services are free of charge. If you are currently sitting in Minnesota, let's say, and you would like for me or Chris to come lead a conversation with your board or a workshop, whatever, it's free. We don't charge you costs for travel. We treat you like you're right down the street from us. So this is something that we are able to offer to the church because so many Moravian ministries invest with us and we get fees from those investments. And one way that we utilize those monies is to offer services that are free of charge. And this one is. So I would be remiss if I didn't make that